Pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I'm your host for tonight, Heather Cook, and joining you from my home in Cincinnati, Ohio. Also joining me by the power of Zoom is our presenter for tonight, BCM archaeologist Jeannine Kreinbrink. So thank you for being here, Jeannine. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's History Museum. That would not be possible without support. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining us for access to discounts and exclusive programming, and you can learn more about that and join at our website, bcmuseum.org. So let's learn more about tonight's presenter. Jeannine Kreinbrink is the president and senior partner at K&V Cultural Resources Management, LLC, which she has co-founded in 2011 with Doug Van Stroh. He has combined a career in cultural resource management with conducting educational and public programs in archaeology, preservation, and history. Her archaeology career began at NKU, volunteering at BCM, where she has been associate archaeologist since 1981. She started a full-time career as an archaeologist in 1986, working on urban archaeology in Covington. Jeannine obtained her master's in 1992 from the University of Cincinnati and has worked as a professional archaeologist ever since. She serves on the board of directors for the Friends of Big Bone. She helped found and served on the board of the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum and also taught as an adjunct professor to the anthropology and history departments at NKU from 1997 to 2014. And she currently serves as the registrar for the Register of Professional Archaeologists. Thank you, Jeannine, for being here. Now, a few reminders before we get started. We love participation from our viewers, so if you have a question or comment to share, please type it in the chat or the Q&A feature, and we will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. And now for the fun part. We have a quiz question. The first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live wins a Northern Kentucky History Hour prize. And most importantly, bragging rights. So, tonight's question is, what other local historian has written extensively on development out from Covington along US 25 towards Florence? Please leave those answers in the chat. And we will go ahead and turn it over to Jeannine to get started. And I will get those slides up. Oh, there we go.
There we go. All right. So the title of the talk tonight is How Land Shaped Lives, Settlement Patterns in Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County. And various summaries of it include what did early native inhabitants and 18th century and 19th century settlers have in common? They all sought the same things: fresh water, fertile ground, place to build a life. But the land of Northern Kentucky offered different challenges and opportunities depending on where you stood. So how did natural features like topography, stream access, and resource distribution influence early American Indian settlement patterns and later development by European American settlers? To get started, we need to talk a little bit about geology and settings and topography, and we can go to the next slide. Now, I'm not a geologist by any means, and I suggest at some point we should probably get a geologist to talk about all of this in depth, the beginning of this. But what I want you to take from these next couple of slides are a couple of things. So if you look at this slide in the center, it says the top, you can see it on the screen. In the middle, it says Greater Cincinnati International Airport, but that's just to give you a reference point. Because on the left, it says Ohio River, and on the right, it says Licking River and then the Ohio River. Those two Ohio River markers are the Big Bend in the Ohio River. So if you're coming downriver and you come around the Big Bend up around Campbell County and across Cincinnati, you hit the Licking, and then you keep going around the bend in Boone County, and there's the Licking River or the Ohio River again. But look at all the bumps in this. So in the center between the Licking River and the Ohio, which is a little bit is Kenton County and Boone County, it's almost all at the same level. And on the right side of the Licking River, between that and the Ohio, is Campbell County. It's a little higher and a little more hilly. And that's what we're going to be thinking about here as we move forward. And we can go to the next slide. Okay. There's a lot going on here. We're not going to talk about, although these are great. I found these great slides. What you want to look at is way up in that upper right where it says Lexington Peneplain. And it'll make more sense in the next slide, but we're going to stay with this one for a minute. So the Lexington Peneplain is the result of all of the erosion after the Ordovician time period when this was underwater, and that's why we have all the fossils that we have. And all of the more recent layers eroded off, and it left a pretty flat surface. And what ended up happening is rivers and streams started eroding through this peneplain or plateau, cutting down and creating streams and rivers. And this is a cross section. It's the Licking River and Eagle Creek. They're two different rivers and streams, but kind of similar kinds of things with the different kinds of soils and the different levels. But the upper part is really what interests us. And you'll see it more in the next slide. We can go to the next slide. Okay. What I want you to get out of this is that the tops of all of these hills are almost all at the same relative elevation. So top, we've got Melbourne and Campbell County, from Route 8 to US 52 on the Ohio side. We got Fort Thomas, we got Anderson Ferry area just west of downtown, Rising Sun, etc. So if you look at all of these, the upper elevations are all between, say, 750 and 900 feet. So, and if you're from around here and you drive any of these ridge tops and you look around, when you're up on top of one of the high ridge tops, you can see all the way long distances to show that almost all the tops of the hills are around the same level. So that all of the streams and valleys have eroded through that. And so they're all at lower elevations. So hopefully it'll make more sense soon. All right, next slide, please. All right, I couldn't really zoom in too much or I wouldn't get it all on the same slide, but you can get some wonderful images now. This came off of Kentucky from above. And so this is essentially LiDAR, and it kind of gets rid of all the surface trees and things and shows you some of the differences in the elevation and some things to look for. And I don't have a pointer now because we were having computer issues. So I'm doing this from my phone and Heather has the pointer. But if you look in the center there where it says Erlanger, and I've got it labeled in a later map, but that line going north-south through Erlanger, that's obviously the Kenton and Boone County line. And the Kenton and Campbell County line is the Licking River. And we'll see that again soon. But if you just look at the terrain, you can start to see how different Campbell County is. All of those little marks and lines, those are differences in elevation. Those are streams and narrow ridge tops. And the southern part of Kenton County is pretty much the same. And then it starts to broaden and flatten out as you get up in that center part. And the county line runs what's called the dry ridge. And we'll talk more about that in a later slide. And then Boone County, as you go west, all of the streams you start to see, and they have wider terraces and stream bottoms than the ones in Kenton and Campbell, except the Licking River have. So it's all very different. And the dry ridge is a continental, well, a local divide. So all the streams on the west side of that flow over to the Ohio, or northwest to the Ohio, and everything on the east side of that line flows over eastward to the Licking River. And Campbell County is the same. It's got a small divide of streams running into the Licking, but many more of them flow into the Ohio. We'll keep that in mind. Next slide. Thank you. This is a better version of that, although I don't know why it has the big tan thing down the middle, but it's supposed to have been blended together. But you can see it better on this one. I was able to find a better version for Kenton and Campbell County on GIS, which has some great images. And the Boone County one is off of Boone County GIS, but I couldn't get to the same gray. But you can definitely see all of the bigger streams in Boone County. The one that's going out from the center to the southwest, that is Gunpowder Creek, Big Bone Creek, and Mud Lick are down there in the bottom southwest. And the big flat area in the middle, and the big Licking River Valley going from south to north between Kenton and Campbell. So you can see a little bit more of the relief here. All right, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to start talking with the Native American occupation first and talk a little bit about what differences we see in the different counties in the settings, and then we'll move into the historic period. So next slide, please. This is just a really brief general overview. I know I've got other presentations that are probably on the YouTube that go in depth into the Native occupations and the different time periods. We're going to skip over a lot of the details because we don't have time tonight, but we will talk more about who was living where and maybe why they're living in certain places. So we start at the bottom with the first Paleo-Indian occupants, at least 12, 13, 14,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers. We move up through the Archaic, which is a very long time period with many changes happening during it. And then the woodland, and then the Mississippian or late prehistoric, and then into European contact. And we're going to briefly go through these one by one and talk about where we find archaeological sites associated with them. So Heather, next slide, please. So we're going to start with First Nations or Paleo Indians. The 3 points that you see in the slide are Clovis points. They're the earliest ones we found around here. And these are actually from Big Bone Lick. These 3 were actually found by William Clark in 1807. And they ended up at the, weirdly, Cincinnati Art Museum, and then they gave them to the Cincinnati Museum Center. So they were found at Big Bone. And this is just an image of what the family groups and the may have looked like as they moved through the landscape. They definitely had dogs. They had spear throwers and all kinds of other stone and bone tools and clothing and all of that. So next slide, please. There we go. Okay, we're back to the map. We'll come back to this map more than once. So paleo sites that have been documented in northern Kentucky are all in Boone County. That doesn't mean that Kenton and Campbell don't have sites from that time period. We haven't found any. in those other two counties. And kind of a caveat or a word here about the difference in archaeological studies across the three counties. Boone County has had more archaeological surveys throughout its history than Kenton and Campbell have. And some of the reasons why, or what we're going to talk about tonight. On the other hand, Boone County has at least 8 different sites with artifacts from this time period. 2 of them, at least, are inside Big Bend State Park. We don't know exactly what trench Clark got these 3 projectile points out of, but they were found at Big Bend while they were digging up the mastodon and the bison bones in 1807. But there are other sites. I've got them marked on here. If you look up to the north, there's a number 1 up north of Burlington. There's 1 over south of Petersburg, and 4 additional ones kind of down in that southwestern part of the county. So focused on stream channels, resource locations. And I think that the fact that Big Bone Lick was in this southern part of Boone County is a big factor in why we do have so many known paleo sites in the county. They were following the herding animals, animals that were moving around the landscape, and they appear to have been following them, and so logically ended up at Big Bend in this early time frame. Next slide, please. There we go. All right, so the Archaic period is a very long time frame, 7,000 years or so, give or take. As the large animals moved north or went extinct, the local people, we now archaeologists call them Archaic time period, they began to settle down in terms of not moving as much around on the landscape. They were still moving around during the year. Many small sites, and they're pretty much focused on river valleys, and they like places where they could access multiple resource locations. So if they're living in a stream valley, they might be where they could also access the uplands or the river valley as they needed to, or move up and down in the stream valleys. There are a few larger sites where the people were going back to the same place year after year or decade after decade. And by the Middle Archaic, which is, say, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, we see a big decrease in the number of sites, and we'll look at that in a minute. But we start to see groundstone tools. So the picture in the lower left, these stone tools were actually found on a site on Tippenhauer Road in Campbell County. So pestles for grinding food, axes for chopping, things like that. There's an example in the center slide, and some of the projectile points that were used in this time period on the lower right. By the late Archaic, so we're talking 3,000–4,000 years ago, they are starting to grow plants. They have squash in this area and gourds, and they have sunflowers and other domesticated starchy seeds that they were growing and cultivating in small gardens. So we don't have massive gardening at this time. Big increase in the site quantity and the types of sites. And they were still following the resources around the landscape, but it was a much smaller territory. Next slide, please. Okay. So the numbers that you see on the slide are the sites of the different time periods that have been found so far in each county. So Boone County, massive number of sites, early Archaic 22, and as I said, middle drops way down to 6, but then late Archaic, starting around, say, 4,000 or more years ago, 49 sites at least. And that's different site locations that have produced artifacts from this time period. Kenton and Kenton and Campbell, much smaller number of sites. When we get to the end of the Native American discussion, we'll talk a little bit about why there are some of these quantity differences, but we certainly can see the quantity of sites in Boone County. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, good. Well, I got the map first this time, so we'll talk about the map first, and then we'll move into what the woodland period is or was. So woodland period, about 1000 BC to about 1000 AD. There is, I know, one site in Boone County that dates to maybe 500 BC where some pottery was found that was up near the airport. So up in the uplands. But if you look at the differences here, early to middle woodland, there's at least 104 sites in Boone County that have artifacts from this time period. And primarily we're talking maybe 100 BC, give or take, up to about 400 AD. And we'll talk about what that involves here in a minute. Late woodland is, say, after 400 or 500 AD for next couple of hundred years. We have 6 known sites in Boone County, none in the other 2 counties. Early to middle woodland, 5 and 6 in those other counties. Next slide, please. Okay. So what is this early to middle woodland? So in some places they talk early woodland, and in some places middle woodland as 2 totally separate things. More and more people are understanding that they're related somehow to each other. It's not really quite understood how, because there are differences, especially in the burial mounds, as to what was going on in these different time periods. This is a big map. The yellow gold color is Hopewell, which is one of the kind of middle woodland, and Adena is kind of what's considered early woodland, because Adena sites generally are a little earlier in time, but then they also overlap. The projectile points on the right are typical of Adena, and the long skinny stone tools called bladelets on the left are typical of Hopewell, and they are not generally found together. They are found in different places. And next slide. So we have to talk about downtown Cincinnati before I show you the next map. There were multiple earthworks in downtown Cincinnati. It says William Henry Harrison remarked when he first saw the level plain in 1791, I think, it was literally covered in low lines of embankments. The number and variety of figures in which these lines were drawn was almost endless. And the drawing to the left at the top is by Daniel Drake, and showed his memories of where he saw earthworks dated 1815. Some of the artifacts that were found in some mounds in Cincinnati are shown on the lower right. A very famous one is the small rectangle, and that's called the Adena tablet. And it's a rectangular stone that has been carved with a fancy design. And the 1914 Atlas, Archaeological Atlas of Ohio, shows all of those red circles and oblongs and mounds as having been reported in downtown Cincinnati. We'll see why that's important here on the next slide. I didn't have room for it on that slide, so that's why it was a separate slide. So We're going to take a minute here and talk about Northern Kentucky and especially Boone County in relation to the early and middle woodland, because it's fascinating. So I don't have a map showing the number of mounds, but in Boone County alone, there are, I think, at least 25 or 30 earthen mounds. All of which, the ones that have been investigated are burial mounds. They were excavated a long time ago. So pretty much assume that they all are. We don't have any documented actual earthworks in Boone County. That's why Cincinnati becomes kind of important. And I have one other site there, 15 KE 191 marked, that's in Kenton County. So if we look at the Cincinnati, the Ohio River map here, we have Cincinnati kind of there in the middle with the stars. There's a star for Cincinnati and a star for Covington. As we saw on the previous slide, there were a lot of earthworks in downtown Cincinnati. And in Covington, I know of at least three different features that were reported on. One was like a flat embankment somewhere north of Linden Grove Cemetery, where Linden Grove is. And also two mounds that were supposedly one on either side of the road leading out of Covington, which that's not Pike Street, but it eventually leads up the hill to 25. So at least three known in Covington. So I'm kind of considering Covington one of these earthwork centers. And then we have up on the Little Miami, we have the Milford Earthworks and the Turner Earthworks. We have Miami Fort, which is in Shawnee Lookout, Hamilton County Park, down in the corner of Hamilton County by the Great Miami. And then on the other side of the Great Miami, on top of a hill, is one called the Oberding Hilltop Enclosure. So all in this vicinity of Cincinnati, we have at least five different, very complicated, different types of earthworks. So the two on the west are natural, naturally organized earthworks where they follow the line of the hilltop, like Serpent Mound up in Warren County, and the Milford earthworks and the Turner earthworks are geometric earthworks, but they all date to that same, couple hundred AD timeframe. And then we were doing a survey a couple of years ago, and we found this site in Villa Hills, 191. And let's go to the next slide because it's got more dots on it. There we go. All right. So I have the other ones marked here. Milford, Turner, and all that are still marked. Miami Fort, Oberding. But all of these different dots show us sites in northern Kentucky. So 15 KE 191 is a hilltop site overlooking the Ohio River, and it has bladelets. So it has Hopewell period artifacts that are the same time frame as Turner, Milford, Miami Fort, Oberding. In the Rogers site, which is down south of Petersburg, the black and white photo has three bladelets. And I actually wrote my master's thesis on that site, and it has bladelets. And all of the red stars that you see are sites, and there's a couple over in Indiana that are marked, and a few here in Kentucky, a couple up along I-75 that have bladelets. So we have one site 191, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in Boone County. Other ones that have produced bladelets. But they're not on the river. Rogers site's on the river. Everything else is up on the ridge. And if you look at all the blue, look like little rivers or lakes, all the little blue marks, right up along the river around in Boone County and going all the way up around the bend and down toward Lawrenceburg. Those are Adena mounds. So those are burial mounds that produced Adena period artifacts, like those spear points that we looked at and the other artifacts that are considered to be maybe slightly different than Hopewell. And all the little black dots are other mounds. I don't have them all marked on there, but there's quite a cluster up there in the northwest, kind of opposite Miami Fort. And then there's kind of just odds and ends of other ones all around the county. None of those have been excavated. So we don't know which time period they are. But they're all considered to be woodland mounds. And this one has been very fascinating because why are they there? Boone County has always been associated with the Dina time period. So anyway, it's all very, very interesting. And we don't have time to talk about it anymore, but we could talk about it at some point where that's all we talked about because it's very interesting. All right, next slide, please. We'll move on. I could stay on that one all day. All right, so the Fort Ancient time period is later time period, starting around 1000 AD up into the historic time period. We had two important changes. Maize agriculture makes its way into this part of the Ohio Valley, the bow and arrow. They begin to live in more settled villages, planned around maize agriculture. Picture on the upper right shows kind of an example how most of the villages are situated along major streams or river valleys. They move their villages around the river and stream drainages as they strip the local soil of nutrients and nearby wood supply. So most of these sites seem to be occupied for, say, a generation or two, and then they might move up or down that river valley or stream valley and have the village there until the old one regenerates resources, and then they move back. Next slide. So I got two slides here for site distribution. This one is there's at least 49 sites in Boone County that have artifacts from this time period, 4 in Kenton and 5 in Campbell. There's probably more in Kenton and Campbell because there have hardly, weirdly enough, hardly been any surveys up and down the Licking River Valley. So we have quite a gap in our knowledge base because you look at all these river valleys. If you look at the little flat areas along the river, you would expect there to be sites there. I expect that they are. We just haven't found them. Next slide. So this gets interesting too. So if you look at all the yellow dots, those are actual Fort Ancient period villages. So intensively occupied, some of them in multiple occupations where they were there and then they left and they came back. So 2 over along the Ohio River in Campbell County, Dunn and Bentz. 30 Highway site is on Banklet Creek in Kenton County. Arrowsmith site is on Gunpowder Creek in Boone County. Petersburg, of course, over on the Ohio River. And then all those other ones down there at the bottom are all clustered either on Mudlick Creek or on Big Bone. So one of them is actually more than one in Big Bone State Park. And then the other ones are along Mudlick Creek. Probably not a coincidence that they're in the vicinity of Big Bone. Next slide. These are just a couple of fun slides to look at. This is Sunwatch Village up near Dayton, Ohio. If you have never been there, excellent place to visit to learn about, especially the Fort Ancient occupation of the region. This is a recreated village that is recreated on the site of where the archaeological site is located. So that is the actual archaeological site. Just gives you kind of an idea of what one of these villages would have looked like. Understand that there would have been houses all the way around the center plaza. These are just the ones that they have rebuilt. Next slide. Thought I would share a few slides from Petersburg back in, I can't remember, 2013, 2014. We excavated a lot of trenches along the street because they were putting in water lines. And these are some of a couple of the trenches. You can see in the upper left how closely packed all the different pit features were, some examples of the pottery that was found, a beautiful triangular arrowhead up in the top center. Excavation in progress up there in the upper right. So it's just how intensively occupied these village sites actually were. Let's see where are we? All right, so let's stop here just for a minute. I've got a historical Native American slide next, but it's interesting to think about where these different sites are located, and we'll come back to it at the end when we talk about the historical occupation in terms of streams and river valleys and the differences in the counties. Some of it has to do with the fact that there haven't been as many archaeological surveys in Kenton and Campbell but on the other hand, there weren't a lot of sites that were reported early on. And the development in the northern part of the county has probably hindered some of that in the Covington and Newport area, but it's very interesting. All right, next slide. We have to move along here. Made a start late by my computer malfunctioning. All right, so there's little archaeological evidence for native occupation beyond the 1600s, but we know that these villages continue to be occupied up into probably at least the 1600s, or at least late 15, probably well into the 1600s. The site way over to the right, and take this map with a grain of salt. It's a very early map that is kind of weird, but that site way over there to the right is the Bent site, and it has produced historical period like copper artifacts. The site to the upper right on the Ohio side is the Madisonville site, and it has multiple historical period, different kinds of artifacts, beads and copper and little bells and things. Petersburg, we know in Boone County, which is the one in the upper left, has also produced historical period artifacts. And not one archaeological feature at Big Bone, which is down there in the lower left. We know that there was a bison kill site down there that was excavated around 2008, and it was historical time period. The radiocarbon date essentially came back modern, which is probably maybe even 1700. So we know Mary Draper Ingalls was there. And also Denonville in 1739 was brought there by native guides. So we know they were still using Big Bone for getting salt, even though they weren't necessarily living there. All right, we have to move into the historic time period before we run out of time. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is just the 1883 Atlas, kind of help us get a little oriented here for the historical time periods. We're going to run through a bunch of maps here. You can see the dividing lines in pink from Kenton to Boone, and the wavy line going down the Licking River. We'll talk about the county evolution here shortly. Next slide, please. Move fast. All right. Okay. So before 1798, all of this was Campbell County. So Campbell County included all of these three counties, plus all of Pendleton County and parts of Grant and Bracken counties. And Boone County split off in 1798, and Kenton was not split off until 1840. So Boone County had enough population by 1798 to split off into its own county. And Burlington was platted in 1800. And over in the other two counties, Newport 1795, Covington 1815, Independence not till 1840, of course, and Alexandria 1834, and it became the county seat in 1840. Most of the time before that, the county seat was in Newport for both the counties, with a short stint in Wilmington, which is down the Licking River below the Big Bend there. All right. Oh, just a note, Kenton and Campbell are the only two counties in Kentucky who have two county seats. So if we're looking at this again, I've got the dry ridge marked on here. And that becomes important when we get to the road maps. But Boone County, up like where the airport is, and to the west, and down these bigger river valleys, and along the big floodplains on the west side along the Ohio, became a magnet for early settlement. And we'll talk about that on the next map, and how and why Kenton and Campbell were a little bit later than that. So next slide, please. This is a fun map because of all the weird stuff that's wrong on it in terms of stuff. But the numbers on there are the numbers of log houses in each of the counties. And these are, whether they're still standing or not, they were standing long enough to be documented. And there were 76 of them in Boone County, 6 in Kenton, and 21 in Campbell. And the volume of log houses in the 3 counties kind of helps illustrate the distribution of early settlement in the counties, and that the earliest settlements were outside of Newport, were in Boone County. And we will go to the next slide, because I have some nice log houses to look at while I talk for a minute. Yeah. All right. So in Boone County, this first settlements in Boone County were overland immigrants, mostly coming from Virginia. They were aspiring to be planters. So they had either they kept their land grant patents or they bought land grant patents, but they didn't sell them off. They kept them in the family. And this has later ramifications in the 20th century for subdivisions, but we'll get to that. The only outlier at this point in Boone County is before 1810, the group of Lutherans came and started Hopeful Lutheran and then Hebron Lutheran up in the northern part of the county. And they were German Lutherans, and they had been in Virginia also. But most of them were not slaveholders, and most of the other early aspiring planters that moved to Boone County were. Kenton and Campbell are a little different. The first settlements in Campbell County was in Newport with the Taylor family, and David Leach and his wife Keturah, who probably had at least 10,000 acres, 1790s. He died, and James Taylor and Keturah Taylor got married, and she brought all that to her marriage. And by the time Taylor died in 1848, he had over 40,000 acres, and that's not including the acreage he sold off, right? So they held on to a lot of land in Campbell County, and other speculators did the same in Kenton, where they were selling off 100 acres, 200 acres, smaller amounts of acreage to incoming settlers. Few of the settlers coming from the Northeast had held enslaved persons. And if you think about what we looked at with the terrain in Kenton and Campbell County, and especially southern Kenton and all of Campbell, narrow ridge tops, steep walled valleys, very few broad terraces. It's not conducive to large agricultural farming, like extensive fields of wheat or corn. It's more conducive to truck farming, and also to eventually to dairies, pigs and steers, and some tobacco. For example, between 1800 and the 1850s, Boone County, 20% of Boone County's population were enslaved persons. Kenton and Campbell together in 1800, 17%, which reflects the first group of settlers who did have enslaved persons. But by 1850, Campbell County only had 1.3% enslaved, and Kenton about little over 2%. Next slide. We're almost done. All right, so we're just going to look at the terrain again and what I just talked about with the narrow valleys. It's just very, wait, we're going backwards. Wait, you went too far. Go back, the other way. The other way. Wait, where are you? You need to be on slide 27. There we go. Thank you. Anyhow, so it just reinforces that idea of the larger farmers. To be a planter, this is all in geography and anthropology and history, but you had to have more than 20 enslaved persons, and many of the early farmers of Boone County were styling themselves that way and trying to compete with the rest of Kentucky. All right, let's run through these other ones real fast because we're running out of time. So this slide and then the next slide, both of which are terrible, but this was from 1828. And the reason I wanted to show this is because by 1828, it shows 3 major roads coming south out of northern Kentucky. They're kind of in the wrong places, except for the one down the center is US 25. The one on the right, I think, is supposed to be maybe 17. And then in Falmouth, it becomes 27 because it doesn't show any road in Campbell County where 27 should be. And the one coming out of Burlington certainly doesn't exist anymore. So that may have been supposed to be US 42. Anyway, so let's go to the next slide, which is just as bad, but and I put a modern slide to show the railroads. So moving up through the 19th century, where they chose to put the railroads and where the roads went had a huge impacts on where settlement occurred. So US 25, which started obviously as a dirt road very early on, greatly influenced the development. And I think I saw where someone got the correct answer. So I can mention Dr. Tenkati, who has written extensively on the development between Covington and Florence along the Dixie Highway and the development of subdivisions through that vicinity. So that was a huge influence, directing traffic and directing development along that dry ridge going down, because US 25 followed the dry ridge down through Crittenden and all that down into Georgetown and into Lexington. And then the development of Kenton, split of Kenton and Campbell counties, focused development in those 2 counties, mostly up in the north. So after Taylor died and after some of the other early speculators died in Kenton County, all those lands began to be sold off into smaller farms, all the way down through the central part of the county. And they stayed generally smaller farms through this whole time, and many of them switched into being dairy farmers, especially in Kenton County, and that's where buttermilk pike comes from, and also into tobacco bases and the railroads. And if you look at the railroad on the old map, you can see it pretty much cut off most of Boone County's access. So none of the major roads ran over into Boone County. Next slide. This is just back to the 1883 map. We're just going to run through real quick. Okay. So what I wanted to mention is that by 1935, Boone farms stayed larger farms, and then they were divided up among heirs in up into the 20th century, so that by 1940s, 1950s, when developers were looking for where they could build subdivisions, and with the airport growing in northern Boone County, a lot of these farms were sold as one farm to developers who could build bigger subdivisions heading out on Route 18 and all parts of different parts of Boone County. Kenton and Campbell is not the same. They're much smaller farms. Are on these narrow ridge tops. So it took a lot longer for those two counties to start to be developed. And we'll get almost to the end. We have 2 slides left and we'll be done. All right, one more. There we go. All right, so for the native population, what influenced their first settlement was most likely Big Bone Lick. They're following the animal herds. They're looking for the salt springs and mineral springs and places they know that animals congregate. Obviously, good sources of water, access to resources. And by early AD, they're looking for good soils for cultivation. And by the Fort Ancient time period, by 1000 AD, they're looking for large areas that they can clear and turn into farm for growing corn on a much larger scale. Next slide. Historic time period, obviously good sources of water for historic, especially a little later. This could include wells and cisterns. Good soils for cultivation, different soils for different crops, right? So Boone County, they're looking for those broad ridges and the flat plains and the wide stream valleys are good for food crops, corn, wheat, other large-scale crops, large-scale tobacco. But tobacco generally ended up on the marginal land and on the narrow ridges, or if they had farmed out the bigger ridges. And as the soil gets depleted, they switch to hay and also into dairies, especially in Kenton and parts of Campbell. Also pigs and steers to take to Cincinnati. Smaller farms could produce small surpluses for truck gardens, going to market and selling to merchants. And so you see a lot of truck farms, especially in Kenton and Campbell. And also on a larger scale, all the ones up on the River Road in Boone County. So we're running out of time. Lots and lots to talk about, but let's go to the last slide, and it's got our trivia question answer. I do want to mention that if you want to look more closely at all of northern Kentucky, the Lake 1883 Atlas, which has Boone, Kenton, and Campbell in it, is wonderful. This is one of the different precincts, and it's online, or there are paper copies at local libraries. Fascinating thing to look at. Okay, so we have questions, Heather?
Yes, we did. But first I would like to go over the trivia question. And that question was, what other local historian has written extensively on development out from Covington along US 25 toward Florence? And that answer was Dr. Paul Tancati. Our winner was Patrick Burns. So congrats, Patrick. If you send us your mailing address in the chat, we can get your prize to you. And I guess we'll start with our questions. But first, I would just like to mention that some of these sites that you were shown excavated in your pictures were excavated through BCM's JCP archaeology program, which was headed by you. Just remind people of that collaboration there. But our first question is, were there paleo sites at other salt lick sites in Kentucky?
Good question. I expect that there are. I haven't done a study of all of the different ones in Kentucky. There's a fascinating, you look up distribution of Clovis points in the US on the internet. There's a wonderful map that's been plotted where they plot how many paleo points by county over the whole US. It's a fascinating map, but so yes, I'm sure that there have been, not up here. That's not to say they're not there. They probably are. Okay.
And the next question was, were the big bone Clovis points the first found in the US?
Probably yes. See, Clovis points should be called big bone points, or at least Boone County, because they were excavated in 1807, but then they went to whatever the forerunner, there was an early museum in Cincinnati, and from there they went to the art museum. And it wasn't until the art museum turned them over to the Cincinnati Museum Center, probably, I don't know, a couple decades ago, that they realized what they had. Because the Clovis points were found in New Mexico, Clovis, New Mexico, in the 1930s. So this is more than 100 years before that.
And we have a question was, has our geology changed much and is it continuously changing?
Yes, and yes. Well, we could do another whole presentation on that. But, yes, so from the Ordovician time period on with the Cincinnati Arch, which is an upthrust of land and everything eroded, and then all the glaciers had a huge impact on like where the Ohio River flows now and on the Miami rivers, et cetera. So the Licking River is a pre-glacial river, so it was already here. And it actually flowed and up the Mill Creek Valley and then flowed north. So now the Mill Creek flows south. So yes, many, many changes. Obviously, yes, everything is still eroding and still changing, and streams are moving around. You know, that's one of the reasons we have so many landslides around here, is because of the glacial soils that got left and they slide off the clay. So yes, changing all the time.
And our last question was, has anyone studied the wood of the log cabins and what species of trees were used?
The one picture that I had up there with the upper left, which was the McGlasson log house, which is in Ellesmere, that we documented before it was dismantled the other year. I believe it had beech floor joists, and I believe at least one of the logs was beech. Chestnut was also popular when it was still alive. Early chestnut. Other hardwoods would have been choices. But yes, some of them.
And those were all of our questions. And since it is 7:30, we will go ahead and wrap up Kentucky history through the week. Check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest curators track with along with our past Northern Kentucky History Hour presentations. So please like and subscribe. And that's all we have time for this evening. So thank you again to all of our sponsors and supporters of BCM. Until next time, take care, everyone, and good night.